I found these pages within an otherwise empty chest. They were crumbled and singed as though my father had tried to burn them with a lighter or candle, and then changed his mind before the fire could take them. The words were scrawled with an unsteady hand and many sentences had been deleted or crossed out. My father disappeared on November the 17th, 2014. How precisely his vanishing act occurred, I don't know. What I do know is that in the latter in his life, he was followed by men who trailed him everywhere he went, according to him, and pressed for the location of a certain John Michaels every chance that they got. The letter itself is illuminating to say the least. When I read it, I knew why he might have gone missing, a revelation which brings me no comfort. I should say the opposite is true. I have read it numerous times, and am yet no closer to finding him. At least I wasn't until a few days ago. The letter reads, Dear Robert Bain, it is with a hand that hardly stops shaking that I write this to you. I have exhausted all of my medication, and have finally worked up the courage to pick up a pen. I am not sure where to begin, although I feel it is my duty to warn those who may follow in my footsteps. I realize the content of this letter is something that I should state publicly, but I cannot bring myself to do it. I do not think anyone would believe me. I will attempt to maintain a level of coherence throughout this exercise, despite the fact that whenever I think of my later periods on the moon, I am stricken with such terror I find words difficult to grasp. Conveying them on paper seems an even greater feat of will, but this is something I must no longer shy away from. In any event, I'm sure you have heard many half-truths about what has happened, perhaps even some truths, perhaps nothing. If the latter were true, I would not be surprised. But I must expose a certain peculiarity pertaining to the moon and its northern regions. But before I go on, and for the sake of clarity, I must point out that I have been interviewed extensively on this subject, and in those interviews told little. Agents belonging to no agency or public institution I could identify have seen their way to my doorstep, even after all my statements and formal testimonies were made. They must have sensed what I had told them were lies. I should like to call these men in black, but due to the recent set of movies, I fear this will be perceived as little else but humorous. Yet, that is what they were. Men in black suits with black ties with black pants and black coats. It is these men that came drilling, time and time again, with persistence no less than mind-racking. The reason I have not revealed what I know is simple. I was not ready to disclose the most extreme happenings which I had been a part of. I feared and still do for my own life. In the event they should discover I have retained all of my memories, since my chief excuse remained that I do not remember. As a result, there is much that I have not told these men. In fact, I have not told them much of anything. I do, however, feel a certain loathing in the prospect of this secret following me to the grave, and it is this sensation which will not allow me to bury it in my mind. I suppose I should begin with what you already know. I must repeat at least some of it, I think, as it will serve as a reminder of what I did, or rather did not do, and what transpired because of it. In my capacity as a theoretical physicist, I was confronted with some dubious truths about the nature of reality, which neither my analytical mind nor the infinite strata of the subconscious could unravel for me in my dreams. I had nightmares about my work, but I should not waste time and paper divulging them in detail. I will say their general outline revolved around me not completing what I set out to do, leaving behind unfinished work. It was in my 9th year of working on the project when I first began to sense something was truly amiss. I could not place my finger on it, which at first added a subtle element of danger to my research, an aspect that was simultaneously the best and the most infuriating thing about it. My fellows at the Institute of Metaphysics in Atlanta, Georgia, seemed oblivious to the fact, but there was something with the equations which just could not be. Here I am not referring to some number or result, which you will soon see. Eventually, the nature of my work drew strange attention. I was noticed in circles quite outside the ellipses of my usual acquaintances. My knowledge and later my network of people helped me to expand my network of contacts to a certain group of men. Lawrence Rockefeller, chief among them. At the time, they provided me with something invaluable, a ways to make my dream come true. I'd always wanted to become an astronaut, an unanswered, childish desire which later turned me towards exploring all manner of psychonautics, the prime achievement of which was the conceptualization of an equation my colleagues and I had been working on for half a decade. Since I could not explore the without as deeply and in the capacity I wished, I decided to focus on the within. The mind had equations of its own which seemed to correlate completely and utterly with those outside. And while my engineering skills paid the bills, it is with the pursuit of the equation and its advancement into theory, which eventually awarded me in a position among the group of 10 to stay and help build what would be the first permanent human outpost on the moon. We would call it Luna 1, or L1 for short. Preparations were made in the year 2003, in secret while it was stated in our briefings that the general public would know about it a year later. I was tasked to assign a list of potential candidates out of which only one would be chosen to assist me. The task of candidate selection was easy, chiefly because I only had one appropriate choice, my colleague, Dr. Amanda Rivers, PhD. She had been with me all along and helped solve many of my mathematical conundrums, with a mind some might consider keen enough to cut through all social convention and contracts. And yet somehow, unlike me, this side of herself did not elude her, and she was able to make herself appear completely average in intellect. She could strike up a conversation with anyone about anything. It was just one of the reasons why I liked her immensely. The question, however, remained if the two of us were capable of going on such an elaborate mission. At first, we thought we would have to build the base ourselves, as this world presented no small challenge for us, but soon discovered that we were in fact the second group, and that the L1 was already operational. Who built it and when was never disclosed, although I, along with some of my, should I say inmates, managed to unravel information about the origin and the age of the structure itself. None of us were pleased about that. It was this data which provided but first of the many mysteries. I'm not sure I should discuss this particular aspect, since nothing was ever confirmed with absolute certainty, although all indications seem to tell the fact that whoever built the structure, it was not us. Who it might have been or why, and even when, I don't know. I will say this: we have known about it for quite some time. I'm jumping ahead a bit, but I find it necessary to point out a few facts. We arrived on the station knowing exactly what to do and how to do it. We had clear instructions on how to operate the seemingly familiar technology, even though it operated on principles that I had not yet seen on Earth. It operated on a kind of wireless mind-based mechanism, without the need for a direct neural interface. Because of this, all of us instinctively knew what to do in case of an emergency, since first we came in contact with some of the machines. For lack of better terminology, it seemed as though an upload commenced immediately upon coming close to the machine, a mind link without the mind's subjective awareness of it. And yet we never heard anything about how these interfaces functioned. We were never briefed about it, or prior to seeing these machines had any discussions about them. No one person ever mentioned it in any briefing. As far as I could tell, a separate division was put in place at NASA for the entirety of the mission. The reason I say this is because later, when I attempted to gain information through my many connections, I discovered no such project existed or ever had. I felt insulted by the curious glances and dismissive laughter which I received, since both implied I must have been dreaming, or had made the whole thing up in my head. The crew and I scarcely mentioned this while on site. We simply assumed the covert nature of the mission will be lifted once our assignment was a success. Yet to this day, I still wait to hear the news about it. After what I have seen, however, I can say that nothing got through the filters in place, Nothing seeped between the compartmentalized divisions of order, of which the complexities and intricacies I can only guess at. The first thing that I should mention as we get to the grind of it is the peculiarity of the liftoff event. There were 10 of us. Amanda and I were referred to as science officers, and being fans of Star Trek, we both found our titles humorous. There was Professor Eric Van Gautier, an engineer of extraordinary skill and knowledge. And then there was John Michaels, whose profession and true purpose, save that he was a decorated soldier, was a mystery to us all. A man whose presence has become the source of woe for me since, vexing my dreams to no end. We were accompanied by 3 experienced astronauts, all trained and capable, always doing things around L1 they didn't have time to explain. Their leader, Captain Assam's chief phrase remained, "No time to explain." Our medical officer, Vanessa Porto, the quiet one, remained in her medical cabin most of the time. And our 2 commanding officers, Major Phelps and Lieutenant Simon Falk. He and the Major were adamant that we call them by name and not by rank, especially the Major, who was, to all of our surprise, an awesome chef to boot. He prepared meals for us each day, claiming it was the one thing keeping him sane on this accursed space rock. His words. I mention them all because every single one of them had a role to play in the end and did something which I thought of as extraordinary or extraordinarily weird. Our 11th member was a silver box of unremarkable design and perfect craftsmanship with etchings that read, Arbiter 001. It was a curious thing already waiting on L1. The box was made of titanium alloy or something of similar weight and hardness. There were 10 of us, and all we ever saw since getting on a plane and onto a shuttle were the darkened windows of what was a military aircraft, along with the corridors and empty rooms through which we were led by Major Phelps himself. We never spoke to the pilot until we later discovered that he had been Lieutenant Simon Falk himself. In other words, they made sure the number of people involved in this was the smallest digit possible. I should probably mention a thing or two about the extensive 2-year training regime we all underwent. I will say only that I ate what they told me to eat, exercised when they told me to, and worked when they had scheduled me for it. I got paid like you would not believe. I talked to Amanda a lot, and she said that her trainer was just as much as a mute. The one assigned to me talked rarely, and even then it was to give commands and push me forward in my fitness regime. As a result, I completed the final test with ease. I'll tell you this, Robert. I honestly never imagined I would be able to do what I ended up doing, which was embarking on a space shuttle strapped upon a rocket going at roughly 5G. I always wanted to do it. I just never thought I would be capable of it. I still remember forcing myself not to struggle against the inertia of liftoff and riding it out, which I had imagined I would never be able to do without proper conditioning. I also remember the sudden weightlessness that made me taste bile as we spat into the divide between our planet and the moon. We were inside the moon's inner gravitational pull a day and a half later. I remember at one point, Hudson suddenly urged us to keep personal chatter at a minimum. And I remember Amanda snorting something like, "What will you do if we don't comply, Houston? Come up here and fire us." I remember everyone but John Michaels laughing at that. We were in a terrific mood. "Please comply to a protocol of minimal chatter," was the door response. We made our first contact with something from out there, at the 36-hour mark from the point of liftoff. The craft appeared on our right, where my own small viewport looked over empty space. For the record, let me state that I would like nothing more than to say it was a bright orb. A metallic disc like any of the phenomena reported by a wide array of alleged witnesses. It would be easier to say that it was just like that. But this was something different. It seemed to bend space as it moved, curved light, for the stars behind it would twist and contort as if the thing were a black hole. The first to comment was the Professor Van Gautier, at precisely 13:45 hours. He said, "Gentlemen, I believe we are screwed. He was a man of quick laughter and idiot tricks, and his tone was humorous as usual, yet held an obvious aura of fear. "Bogey coming in at 3 o'clock, Assam reported. The response he got from Mission Command made me question so many things all at once that I was left speechless. "Proceed." I can say the way the object moved was strange, but that is neither what paralyzed my faculties, nor what really struck me about it. It did not move all that much or particularly fast. It was when it turned towards us and hovered there, above the moon in all its blackness, that I saw something which drained all the blood from my face. I am certain that I saw tentacles on it, or more precisely, some kind of semi-transparent dendrites. They appeared to be ephemeral and indistinct, and it was their movements which gave them away. I remember forgetting to blink for a while in the cockpit, going silent, the computer's hum slowly bringing me back to a state of alertness. "Y'all see it?" one of the astronauts finally asked. "Yo," mumbled the other. I could see the 3 astronauts silhouetting the moon, but I could no longer see the dark shape which trailed us, for it moved and was now below our shuttle. It then shifted to a collision course as it drifted up and slowly began to appear before us, blocking the moon and making the cockpit lights flicker. "Requesting permission for immediate course correction," Assam said with an audible dose of panic. "Negative, proceed." The response silenced us, and I heard something upon the air then, although no one else confirmed this to be the case. What I heard was a strange kind of gargle on the very threshold of hearing, as though a voice were transmitted over inconceivable distances and suffered a resulting poor transmission quality. A wavering burr like a growling stomach. The craft's translucent dendrites were hard to look at, but not due to any quality of light or proximity. It was the way they moved which made me wish I had kept my mouth shut and stayed on my home planet. Its movements were that of a sea creature gone mad. I began to panic, I admit. Not just sweat or shake, but hyperventilate while pretending internal screams do not exist. All coupled with a tightness in my chest bordering on pain. I could not bring myself to actually scream, and I remember feeling that if I do, the entities within the object will hear me and see me. At that point, I became convinced of our imminent demise. It was when I looked closer into the black thing and realized there is a faint light burning within, that I was filled with a singular terror. There appeared a form of a man, or at least a hominid, floating in the middle of the sphere, lying on his back so that I could see its odd feet. He was surrounded by a diffused glow like that of a candle, and appeared to be pivoting. And then the thing vanished. It left no trace. We heard Houston saying something about losing our signal and whatnot, but my mind drifted. The 3 astronauts took care of communications. Van Gogh appeared the most vocal of us, swearing like a drowning sailor and being largely incoherent. I felt that we all had the same questions in our heads, and I knew none of us had answers, so no one asked, as if probing into the subject might make the object reappear, which nobody wanted. I was later told that I had been saying things, and that the crew was talking to me in turn while the object had been there. I remember none of that, but could never shake off the feeling that the creature inside the craft was talking to me. The crew spoke little until the point of landing. The procedure went with 0 complications. We settled in quick, although I never got used to the cold but managed to curb its influence with a regular exercise regime. The whole station was powered by a deuterium reactor, to which only Van Gogh had access to, and seemed to spend a lot of time in. None of us failed to notice his expressions of befuddlement each time he came back from his trip to the core. Yet he refused to talk about it, although it felt to me as if this was only because talking about it would bring forth some kind of trauma, as though going silent about it was a way to hypnotize himself. Amanda and I had separate beds but not separate quarters. All in all, life was good in these somewhat sterile halls and compartments of L1. All of us got along well enough. It is with great joy I now remember and write this aspect of things, since our first months on Luna 1 were nothing short of bliss. Excitement was high and our hopes were up. However, a thing hung above our heads. We never discussed it, even though we all could feel it. A sense of the station being from some other place. The thing that we had seen hanging above the moon was the source of many visits to the doctor's office. Certain I was not alone with this. Nightmares and extensive dream scenarios are common when the mind is exposed to new stimuli and locations. Dr. Porto had told me, "I know the dynamics of dreams, Vanessa." I remember telling her somewhat arrogantly, "These are different." "How so?" "They're like nothing I remember having back on Earth." "Well, we're not on Earth." "Still." She gave me a quizzical look and took notes in her notepad. Her long fingers were almost mesmerizing and her presence was calming. "Explain them in detail, if you will," she said. Even her voice was silk. I told her everything. I do not feel the need to repeat these here, as they are not integral. I will say this. The dreams managed to tell me how I should go about completing my work. Vanessa, however, gave me what I thought was an inaccurate interpretation, and some melatonin pills, 5 milligrams to take before sleep. Although how she got them on the station, I didn't bother to ask. I never took them. Work and life on L1 continued as usual, as did my dreams. And it was not until our 76th day on board that something set in motion a chain of events that ultimately led me to write this letter. We were having lunch in the main mess hall, which was on the 4th floor of the spire. Its wide windows gave us a clear view of the Aristarchus Plateau, with its gray valleys and dark pools of shadow. Jen Phillips once again outdid himself with his meal, which he prepared for us using ingredients I thought were impossible to improve. Anyway, at the end of our meal, we began to review our work and reports from the previous day, as it had become our ritual. When I spotted something which certainly could not exist in a universe that we occupied. It was also the first of many incidents because of which the good Dr. Vanessa Porto went mad. Walking from between the swells of 2 low-standing hills was a shape. I don't know if I should say that it was walking or floating or swimming. It might have been doing all of these. At times it appeared as a shadow suspended on dust, while in other instances it looked as if a shape of a man might take a step out of that shadow and become whole. I saw my face in the transient mist. The sounds it made were the same I heard in the shuttle, yet more here, near, on top of me almost. It caused me to cover my ears in panic as the rest of them turned to see where I had pointed. We all saw it vanish into the ground. None of us worked that day. Instead, we got caught up in discussions about the nature of reality and what we saw, until our debate eventually sparked a keen interest about what it is Amanda and I actually do. We were the only ones not handing in daily reports, since our progress had come to a halt even before we came on L1. We were all too eager to brush the event aside as one of the anomalies of the Aristarchus Plateau, for the region is known for its releases of gaseous fumes and strange aberrations of mist due to the radioactive decay interacting with solar wind. We all wished to believe that and dismiss what we had seen as nothing more. But fumes and gas do not generate the sound I heard, nor look at you with forming eyes. The crew persisted in their inquiries until Amanda and I led them to our place of work. L1's 3rd floor and its curved white walls, the entirety of which had been assigned as my office, were completely overwritten by black markers. It was the only thing Amanda had brought along with her, a small box of markers. We kept our main equations opposite the glass wall, overlooking the Aristarchus Plateau, while the rest of the wall had been transformed into a display of elaborate equations in what Van Gogh referred to as a masterfully woven symphony of numbers and letters. I remember what he said because his compliment made me feel proud. "There is nothing symphonic about this, Van," Amanda pointed out laughing. "Ben is actually very messy in his work. I spent half my time backtracking when he forgets where certain sections of the equation stream are. Being his assistant, one would think that's your job, replied Van Gogh. She's not my assistant, more like a partner in crime, I said, certain that it sounded as cliché as it felt. What is the ultimate goal of your labor? Asked Michaels, who stood at the far end of the wall looking intently at it, hands on his back. His tone of voice startled me because he rarely spoke and had a harsh tobacco-roughened voice. To access the point where matter meets mind through a non-local means of thought transfer, I said. Can equations provide the means of accomplishing such a task? Michaels inquired. Equations show the source where all reality emanates from, said Amanda. It's where the alpha and the omega can be seen and played with. They are the playground of God. That's just silly, and Goye laughed, while the others said nothing, each looking at their own section of wall. Before I go on, please realize that I'm writing these conversations down so they may help convey the sane disposition of the crew. In that moment, while all of us were standing and talking, I saw Michael stop and lean close to the very section of the equation which most baffled me. I know for a fact, having looked at the recorded video feeds, although they are low res, that no one had tampered with the equations. And yet every day when we came back to a particular section, the numbers were missing, erased, replaced by symbols I am certain none of us had drawn. When Amanda and I would attempt to copy these symbols in our notepads, strange things would happen. Not only could we never actually draw the lines that we saw, as though they would not permit themselves to be duplicated, but the very nature of things began to shift. Surfaces lost their edge, and suddenly you could no longer tell where one thing ended and the next began. And light, my God, the light. There were dark, oily faces in it, and if there is something I would like to forget more than anything else, it is the way that those faces stared at you. They were of the ghastliest nature, bulging eyes that never blinked and screamed down the very upper edge of hearing, faces shifting into grotesque expressions of sadness and pain and torture. It was John Michaels who took out his pad and wrote down the first perfect duplication of the symbol on the wall. I do not know how he managed it. One could not even place a paper over the symbol and hope to trace it, for the symbol could not be seen as though not there, no matter the thinness of paper. But in that moment when John managed to do it, a breeze blew out of nothing. Just a breeze, cold enough to set my teeth on edge and smelling of something strangely familiar, like fresh paint. Vanessa shrieked, saw something, for she had always been the most sensitive of us, and ran out of the room. She didn't make it far as we later found her in the corridor outside, curled up in a ball. Up until then, I never noticed how tiny she was. The rest of us headed over to the command deck, glad for the distraction. We went because one of the astronauts pointed out that his device was reporting a malfunction in the base command programming. We also went because all of us instinctively wished to stay together. None but the 3 astronauts were qualified to handle the mainframe, at least not with any level of mastery. Still, we all went, which meant all of us saw what waited for us there. It was another man, ashen, gray, and naked, his backbone protruding as he stood hunched behind the main console and just stared at it. He wasn't breathing, and when he turned it felt like neither was I. Amanda, 2 of the 3 astronauts and Lieutenant Falk simply ran, scrambling out of the wide-windowed chamber like it had caught a blaze. As for myself, I do not know if it was fear or utter fascination which held me in place. There was a mouth where the thing's chest should have been, a sideways gaping mouth. Vanessa Porto, a doctor who you would expect would be used to shocking sights, flopped to the floor. I glimpsed the last astronaut still remaining, Assam, dragging her out of the room, panic in his eyes. The ashen man's, if one could even call it a man, ribs were yellow, shaped into protruding fangs, and could see its shriveled heart flapping around like a tongue, drizzling a yellow mucus. Its countenance was unbearable. I could not look, nor could I look away. I was made even more horrible by the pellucid light of the command deck, with every feature of the thing cast in wrinkled and repugnant ugliness. I'm not ashamed to admit that when its single eye in the center of its forehead, the only feature on its face, slowly blinked and shifted its gaze into my own, I wet myself. The eye's quality was so dark and menacing, it seemed to stare from another, profoundly more twisted and unknowable dimension. I have seen that eye in my dreams every day since. Now perhaps you have wondered why I included another envelope in this letter with, "Do not open until you have read the letter" written on it. Inside, you will find a crude imitation of the shape which found itself in my equations. Open and look at it when you finish this letter, so you can attest to the truth of it yourself. All you have to do is look. Please, do it later, because what I'm about to write now is something I've been aching to relate more than the rest. I found myself in my own bed, roused from sleep by a fitful dream. I had no recollection of how I got there, but assumed I must have been carried, the spot between my legs still wet from before. There was no one. The base seemed quiet save for the ever-present hum of the reactor. On my left, a faint light streamed in from the corridor outside. Something cast a long shadow over the floor, a thing I could not see as my bed was near the side wall. I stared at the shadow for a long time, and then slowly gathered my nerve and got up. I was inclined to call out, to say something, but I could not find my voice. The shadow shifted, and I stepped forth to see something move around the corner up ahead. Michaels? I do not know why I thought it might be him. Amanda! There was no answer. I cannot say what makes men move in situations like these instead of covering under the bed like a child. Whatever it is, call it courage, call it curiosity or stupidity. It made me move as well. Mostly I think it is the feeling of wanting to find it instead of it finding you. As I walked ahead, the bend in the corridor just a few strides ahead of me, I felt something grumble in the walls around me. A gyration on the edge of perception like a distant, dying wail. A wavering burr. Hey! I said into the speaker comm on my wrist, and still remember an echo of the most heinous quality. All I got back was what I heard before, a strange, near subsonic growling. When I heard that, I crumbled to the floor and curled into a ball. The tone was not out there, but felt like it was pulsing in my head. I began to weep out of pure despair, and I could not shake off for what felt like an hour. When I finally, slowly got up, wiping tears from my eyes and mucus from my nose, I walked the next bend carefully. To my left stretched a glass wall along the length of the corridor, all the way to another, right bend in the hallway. When I took a step, I heard words coming from the comm speaker above me. It sounded as if something simply said, very slowly, so that the S never really got through. Instead, the E stretched out and faded in a low grumble, becoming slower and more stretched until it ceased to even be anything but an ugly sound. What I shall say next may seem out of place, but I assure you that it's not. All of my life I have refrained from telling lies. I believe lies are told when we are afraid, either of ourselves or what others may think of the truth. I was never afraid of the truth. Ironically, I think it was this search for it that led me to my predicament. With this preface, I hope you will believe what I'm telling you, because when I looked out of the glass wall, the figure that I had seen in the command deck floated behind it. Its eyes stared at me. In an instant, when I saw the downcast gaze and the shadow cast about the eye, I knew that it wished me harm. If ever an eye could convey, "I will hurt you," that I did. I jumped and I pressed my back against the cold wall. My heart was ready to leap out of my chest. I could see the Aristarchus plateau behind the figure, and above it, a great black void twisting and contorting, with long, dendrite-like protrusions thrashing endlessly through the atmosphere of Luna. The thing was enormous. I could not see the end of it, nor could I tell how high up it went. It rose in a black wall, stretching into the firmament, obscuring all stars. I ran. I did not know what else to do, nor was I thinking of what to do. My feet decided for me. I ran the spiraling staircase all the way to the uppermost dome-like space serving as the office for Major Phelps. I think in my semi-delirious state, I felt it might be safer here, like a cat running up a tree. It never occurred to me that I may be running headlong into a trap. In the glass dome, the dimming systems were active, so the windows were as black can get. It was either that or some darkness had descended upon the station that I had no power to dispel. Nor did I wish to, certain that outside was nothing that I wished to see. It felt like a giant mouth had been closed around me, and there was no chance that it will open again and let me out. The room itself was lit by hooded lamps placed inside the walls at feet level, each light standing 2 strides apart from the other. The place was carpeted by papers, documents covered the floor. They were all the essays and reports that we had managed to write in our time on L1, and it seemed the general was studying them meticulously. Some titles were circled with black markers, and sections of others were underlined in red. Most had black lines running over sections of the text, covering it in secrecy, and from what I could tell at a glance, these mostly covered up names and places. Why the general would do this, I had no idea. I walked to the table where a folder was opened, its contents splayed neatly on the circular desk. Allow me to note that the desk was actually a part of the room itself. It could not have been moved or taken out of the room because it was molded out of the floor. It was light blue, almost silver, as all the other walls and decks on L1. Walking to the table, I noticed some of the titles of the documents on the floor. Elucidation of inseparability, auroric spheres, sun refueling phenomena, moonsphere phenomena, shedding of the hyperreality bubble, the threshold of laminality, indivisible causality transitions, induced cryptogenesis, hypersleep, and the incarnation cycle. I could see the general had made extensive notes almost everywhere. I ached to look at each document. What was on the table, however, pulled me forth instead. Before that day, the equations I had been working on hung above my head like afterimages. I saw them in everything. The first time I knew there was something extraordinary was when I worked at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies and Research Lab, where Lawrence Rockefeller, the chief funding power of the research, visited me once. Most of all, I remember his eyes, droopy in a way like no other, as if they held the weight of the world upon them. That day, they held a particularly curious look, like he could see these strands of my future and was not content. He warned me of the dangers my research posed to me. But what did he know? What could he know? I thought then. I should have heeded his words, because when I witnessed the title of the document on the desk, I finally knew why those equations would not let me rest. The title read, Ben Atwood, Arbiter 002. It was a whole case dedicated to me and my research. I read most and I skimmed some, although everything inside felt important. There were sections crossed over by black markers. It's hard to explain how I felt when seeing this document. Imagine reading a book about every conversation anyone has ever had about you. One paragraph caught my attention and I read it slowly. The mind of Ben Atwood has been altered successfully. He will neither know nor understand his impulses, although he will occasionally fight the need to act upon them. Close monitoring is advised at all times, in special cases when... "What are you doing?" A voice interrupted me. I had picked up the case files and I put them on the floor so I could read them more clearly in the light. They took so much of my attention that they took me out of my current predicament in short bursts. When I looked up, the face of Major Phelps, backlit and terrible, downcast with a brow hooded in shadow, gazed upon me from the doorway's brim. He scared me even more than the thing that I had seen earlier, not because of how he looked, but because his voice did not sound at all like his own. But at that point, I did not care that I had gone snooping around in his office. The fact had not even registered. "Mark!" I jumped. "What's going on?" He did not answer me. He turned to the right and walked where the light from the hallway gave me a quick glimpse of his eyes. They were glossy and bulging, staring as though locked in some expression of terror or mania. "General!" I yelled. I picked up some of the documents from the floor along with my case file. It felt too precious to leave, and I ran after him. I wanted answers. I wished to know what the heck. Suddenly all of this felt like some dream. I slowed down when I noticed he was leaving a trail of blood behind him in small trickles. Perhaps it is still hard for you to understand why I followed him, and maybe I would not have had I considered the notion twice. But in that moment, he was the only anchor to reality that I had seen since waking up, so I chased him. Every door that I passed was open, and the unlit compartments gaped darkly as I ran through the badly lit corridors, never able, or honestly, never allowing myself to catch up to Mark. I stopped at the open doorway of the medical bay. I heard sobs within. She hissed at me when I came close. Vanessa Porto actually hissed at me. I called her name, tried to rouse her from whatever madness had gripped her, but instead, she shambled about when I tried to get close, pushing medical equipment and surgical instruments over the work desks and sending them clattering against the floor. "Nessa," I asked, my own voice odd to me. She had that look about her. "Any closer and I'll slice you." "What are you doing?" The major again behind me. He was standing at the doorway staring. I had squatted at a safe distance from the girl, her eyes following mine as I stood up. It was then a realization hit me. I had felt it before, yet I could not pinpoint what it was. Vanessa's hair was at least half a thumb longer than I had remembered it. The general moved down the corridor as Vanessa began slashing at me with the scalpel. I defended myself with the documents that I had picked up, rather comically. She slashed until I threw them in her face and I left her there. I followed Phelps all the way down into the pulsating courtroom, a place I imagined could never have been inhabited by anyone sane. The sound alone would suffice to incapacitate me had I experienced it for longer periods of time, and this I know. I caught up to the general in the antechamber before the courtroom. When the blast doors opened, I almost fainted from the sounds emanating in rumbles more primal than any bass I had ever heard. The sounds were not as much an audible menace, but a series of persistent body impacts. The core itself rested in the middle of an enormous cavern, between two pillars, like a miniature black hole suspended between a stalagmite and a stalactite. The thought which immediately came to mind was, what the actual heck? The general stood beside me with his bulging eyes sunken inside an ashen face. I tried talking to him, but his answers scared me enough to stop. Things were coming out of the core, oily and spewing like leaking coolant. The quality of them infected everything that was touched as though it were ink spilled over fabric, a heavy, tar-like substance. I rushed to the control panel as the thing began nearing the opening, although I assumed the access would not stop it. I recall ramming my palm on the control key with such force that I nearly broke my wrist. The general was lying on the floor motionless, blood running from both of his nostrils and ears, painting the rectal area of his trousers dark. I had not seen or heard him fall, and I did not check for a pulse. There was too much blood. I escaped with the sound of the antechamber door grinding, petrified out of my skull, tears running down my face and obscuring view. I prayed for the first time in my life that whatever was still keeping these hallways lit and the air breathable, to just keep going for a bit more. Just hold on. Please hold on. The corridor leading to the core was poorly lit, and I stumbled over something that I had missed on my way down. It was Van Gogh. He looked up at me, all life drained from his face. "Eric," I said. "Are you alright, man? What happened?" A sense of lingering hope found me then. Perhaps he would tell me something and we could both escape together. Perhaps he was one of those people who would never die. Absurd, I know. His first answer came slowly, which was more like a question. Do you know what happens? Eric, I said, please focus. Are you alright? I'd always liked the man. What happened? Are you okay? Alright, he mumbled. What? Nothing's alright. Before I could say something else, he added, when you look into the core. I decided to play along, even though I had an inkling about what he would say. Tell me then, what happens when you stare into the core? I asked him. He tried to say something, but instead threw up blood all over himself. I thought I had been afraid up until then. I truly did. I thought nothing could scare me further or deeper. I was not as afraid as I thought I had been when I saw the thing coming from the core, almost like I had expected it. Even seeing the general bleed out, it did not fully hit me. But when Van Goye turned catatonic and his eyes rolled backwards, it added something profoundly human to my experience, and I realized the general too had just moments before died in front of me. And perhaps it was because I had formed a rather strong friendship with Eric. I stood up and I ran out of there. I ran as if I could leave my fear behind, like I might outrun it if I managed to run fast enough. Tears burned in my eyes and I remember collapsing at some point and sobbing uncontrollably. I had no clue what to do or where to go. I heard the metallic pulse of the core shaking the walls, almost in tune to my footsteps. Pounding. I knew even if I could outrun my fear, that sound would remind me of it. I ended up in my office deck. The walls were not as I'd remembered them, at least not the equations. I remember thinking, where the heck is Amanda? Where the equations ended were scribbles of strange, alien symbols instead of something that I could understand. Although by now, the symbols formed strange suggestions of meaning and purpose. At the end of the office deck, staring out the glass wall, with his back to me and hands behind his back, stood John Michaels. There was something about him which I could not place. He looked at peace, calm, which made me all the more terrified. I felt afraid of my own voice at that point. John? I managed, a pitiful croak. Indeed. He answered in a tone as if that one word explained everything. You seem calm in light of what you're seeing. Outside the window, above the moon's surface, the long growths still thrashed and writhed like angry snakes. From a thing so huge it looked more like a black curtain wall stretching into infinity. John's neck was craned up and he appeared to be looking directly at it. And why shouldn't I be? He asked. I was inclined to say something witty and sarcastic, but all that came out was, because of that. I even remember pointing ridiculously even though he was not looking my way. That what? He asked. I thought, is this a test? Surely, if I give him the right answer, I will win whatever game he's playing. I asked what immediately came to mind instead. A trick question? Perhaps you should come closer, he said. I have no idea why I listened to him. Most likely it was because I sensed a familiar thread hanging in the air again, as though he was trying to make me realize something but would not convey it in words. As I got close to him, the alien appeared again, outside the glass wall. Only this time, it was not floating. This time it was walking. This time it mirrored my own movements. I remember the terrible feeling of my hands trying to synchronize with my eyes. I remember feeling something and seeing something else. I remember getting sick and tasting vomit in my mouth, while grappling at my face with my reflection doing the same. Only it was not my face that I was grabbing in the reflection. What I felt and what I saw did not correlate. Dimensions are a curious thing, said Michaels next to me. One is here and the other is here also, but is not. Something clicked then. In a tumbling stream of images, I remembered how I got there. How I really got there. I apologize, Robert, for not relating these events as they happened, but this is the only way for me to make sense of it. We had found a hidden doorway just after we saw the alien for the first time in the command deck. We chased it, to the metal door. Van Goye, Michaels, the general, and myself. Usually people run from things like that in all the movies I have seen. But there was 4 of us and only 1 of it, so forget that. We chased after it. At one point it seemed like it had vanished. One moment it was there, moving behind a bend in the corridor, and the next it was gone, and the corridor was a dead end. The lunar base was a maze of hallways and compartments, some of which were locked with no way of figuring out how to open them. This had been ominous by itself, but when we had reached a door that was upon none of these schematics, we knew we would either run from the revelation of its mere existence, or go in like idiots. I like to believe that the 4 of us were the ones left who truly wanted to know, the last ones who, despite the fear, will go climb that gosh dang mountain just to say they did it and to see the view. There is no doubt in my mind that expeditions like these rely on men like us. The gateway before us was without a lock or handle and big enough for 2 men to walk through abreast. We knew it was a door because it had a frame, and it opened when we came to close it. We felt like we had no choice at the point and went in. The first thing I noticed was the smell, or rather the odd stench that is produced by the things lacking. There was a slope going down into what seemed like the very core of the moon. Lit by nothing, yet was not dark and cast no shadows. I could not see the end of it. So we headed down. The ceiling was low enough so that John's head almost touched it. The pulse of the base's core faded behind us, and after what seemed like at least an hour of walking, we came upon a set of high-standing pillars within an elongated passageway. There was no end to it, it seemed, bent along with the shape of the moon. The light inside was sterile white-green. We had talked a little on our way, too awestruck and terrified to form sentences, I think. I know we said some things, but I do not feel them too important to relay here. When we came to the pillars, we realized that they were not intended for supporting the ceiling. The only sentence that I will relate, spoken by Eric Van Goye, was uttered when we came near one of the pillars. He said, "The heck?" He had a knack for sentences saying perfectly well what everyone felt. The pillar's details became apparent as though there was some mechanism allowing us to see it only at a correct angle and proximity. A figure stared at us with a single eye, watching our every move. The figure looked as though chiseled upon a tomb wall, carved right out of the stone and so grotesque that I knew it had never been given a human name. The general was standing nearest to it and jumped back when he saw it, and then he shrieked. I never want to hear a grown man shriek ever again. Our intrusion into the chamber awoke something in the rock. I felt its sudden awakening in my chest, a grumbling, a burr. A mist of shimmering stars seeped out of the smooth walls and changed into a solid obstacle made of silver, angry serpents, wreathing. They hardened into a blunt source of horror that from its fair distance away started to race after us, as though we were in a subway tunnel, and an unstoppable train was heading our way, filling up space with its form as it came with a sound of terrible volume. Crap, I heard Van Gautier. The noise of the pursuing entity louder the closer that it came, a single deep bellow. The thing got closer until it was right on our heels. I could feel the freezing air of which it had been composed. My breath misted before me, and every time I saw that mist, I kept thinking that it would be the last breath that I ever would take. I never noticed when it happened, but after a while, General Phelps no longer ran beside me. I caught a glimpse of an abyss behind, and after that, I stopped looking. The incline we had to scale back nearly killed us, Eric and I. We walked through the gate, threw our guts over the floor almost in unison, and... This is the only memory of time I find it difficult to unfurl. Glimpses are all that are awarded to me after this point, for I had become so stricken with loathing, so barraged by the part of my mind that wished to deny it all. To protect me, I suppose, that it has made it as if it did not happen. But I know it did. At least I thought so for a very long while. But what if the walls sucked us all in? It seems impossible that we could have outran it. When I found Michael's in my office deck, staring out the glass wall. We went back to the same chamber, walked the same row of pillars for miles, and found me carved into one of those pillars. It did not look like me, but it felt like me. I know this makes little sense, but if that was me, who is this now writing this letter? What am I? I look the same, I feel the same. But Robert, I am going insane. That tunnel, it doesn't ever leave my mind. In that tunnel we found everyone but Vanessa Porto and the General, and from what we could tell, all were quite dead. Please, Robert, come visit me as soon as you can. I have this sinking feeling something terrible will happen to me. What vexes me the most is this. Why were those things there? And if they were alive, when would they come out of that tunnel? And what should happen when they do? At one point, I attempted to dislodge those trapped inside the pillars below, but could do nothing more than bang on what felt like stone, but it wasn't stone. Even as I did that, Michael stood calm beside me. I knew I could do nothing to help them, and no sooner had I started banging on all the things than the mist began to rise and cloud again, chasing us out by these same phenomena. I would like to say that we searched for Vanessa and General Phillips, yet Michaels and I both know we actually left them there somewhere. We did not locate them, and the station-wide scans came back void. We found Eric where I left him, however, and scooped him up between us. We did not waste time, and in the shadow of the colossal black thing floating above the Aristarchus Plateau, left inside the module we were to use for our trip home, with Van Gogh strapped tightly in his chair. I remember thinking someone must have taken some pictures of the mass. It must have been seen from Earth. It was simply too big for that not to happen. But so far, I have seen nothing. The module took off from the station with roaring flight. Its shaking vibrations filled me with panic, and I thought about who we had left behind, looking at the reflection of my own face upon the black inner displays. I was me again, but I felt more and more depersonalized. We docked with the shuttle, the hiss of magnetized clamps filling the silence between us, and began our journey back. I was slumped in my chair when the final atrocity occurred. In a span of 2, perhaps 3 heartbeats, a shadow engulfed us. We had attempted to contact Houston but got nothing back. I find it difficult to describe the massive scale of the thing inside which we found ourselves. All I can say is that there were no stars and no Earth, only a void where the shuttle disappeared, and the reality took on an elusive edge where my mind felt distant. In the void, things swam, into me and over me. I felt their minds, and it is those minds that now walk in my dreams. They are not like our minds. No thoughts save the unknowable depths of the void, where humans form transient rippling thoughts in reality. And that void, Robert, that nothingness is more frightening to me than all the wicked thoughts men can muster, and all of the hells that we can dream up. I was nearly swallowed whole by it. A feeling so alien and unavoidably finite that fear seemed to permeate me, or whatever it was that I had become while in that state. I knew that to touch that edge would be to become as the void. I remember waking up in the hospital with both Michaels and Eric Van Gogh gone, and the doctors saying that I was the only one that they had retrieved, floating in an escape pod in the middle of the Pacific. My circumstances were supposedly very odd, although their elaborations are vague now. Judging by the length of my beard when I touched it, I realized that when I woke up that I must have been unconscious for a while. I would like to plead for someone to go back and try to get those people out, but I will not do that. I know they are gone. Also, I will not do it because I'm not sure how I got back. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure I even am, because ever since I touched the cold soil of Earth again, saw its tall spires while in the Boston skyline, I can feel an inconceivably vast and grim something beyond. A thread. I know what's up there above us, waiting for something, and I'm afraid that I will not be able to withstand the realization when it finally dawns on me why they are up there. The most terrible thing is that I can feel the truth scratching at the back of my mind, but cannot see it. I must end this abruptly as I can barely keep my eyes open. Still, I fear sleep as I have for the past 5 years, but perhaps today I may sleep more soundly. If you wish, please find me, Robert, so that we may discover the truth of this together. Your friend always, Ben Atwood. P.S. On second thought, I've decided not to include the envelope with the symbol. Please come see me as soon as possible, and don't email me, and especially don't call me. They are listening. I will have my son deliver this to you. For the first few weeks, I read this letter over and over, yet my conclusions have become a source of paranoia for me, and so I will explain what I think in hopes of alleviating it. I could hardly believe my father had been transformed into some sort of alien and miraculously changed back. This was rather unlikely, to say the least. Regarding this letter, I had made notes of my own, and the connections I began to make were startling. I rarely talked to my father about his work, but he was obsessed by it, and you could even say possessed. Simply said, I think the people on board L1 were there solely so for my father would be able to talk to whatever entities resided on the station, but in the end, ultimately failed due to his inner happenings. What I mean by that is this. All of the inner alchemy which happens to us, especially fear, got in the way of what he was sent to do. It seems my father's research was set up so that he may arbitrate or communicate with an alien life form. He talks about a 1-year training program that they all underwent. He says all, yet clearly an astronaut would probably not have to go through this, which might suggest the all was to some degree in his mind only. I'm now convinced this training program of which he speaks must have been a way of brainwashing him to use his mind for a specific purpose, hence the I ate what they told me to eat, exercised when they told me to, and worked when they scheduled me for it. I now think John Michaels was there simply to make sure everything went along as the big ups in charge imagined it, and to invoke certain responses in my father. John's actions suggested this fact, since all his doings were that of ultimate detachment and of keeping things in check. At one point, he even asked my father what he was doing with the equations, almost as if to make sure everything was on track. I think the general sensed something wasn't right all along, hence the reason why he read all those reports, trying to piece together everything. Vanessa was obviously there in case of a medical emergency. The equations, I imagine, were incredibly extensive, so Amanda must have aided my father more in an emotional capacity, keeping him sane, so to speak, directing him in this way and that more than anything else. Although the fact that they could not find her doesn't give much credit to the fact that she even existed at all, and that she might have been a fabrication of trying to come with this severe emotional distress. My father certainly never mentioned her. The astronauts. I now have my doubts that there were even 3 of them, and I think my father might have been suffering from delusions at that point. I imagine a brainwashed mind makes up all sorts of things to cope. Perhaps none of the astronauts were there, since Assam is a region in India that produces what was my father's favorite tea. Having known my father, I am now almost 100% certain there was in reality no person called Van Gautier. I examined the little text available on this particular individual, and have come to believe this was in fact my father's alter ego. What finally struck me that this might be the case was when I remembered that on his 35th birthday, he got a cake from his fellow employees. One of them made a toast and literally said, "To Ben, a man of quick laughter and idiot tricks," which is precisely how my father described Van Gautier. Not to mention that, having read the letter myself, Van Gautier is introduced as a likable and vocal guy, which my father was not. The pilot, Simon Falk, I think might have also been a fabrication, although on that I am not sure. But here is the real kicker. If you recall, when asked by John Michael what is the ultimate goal of his labor, my father answered, to access the point where matter meets mind through non-local means of thought transfer. I think he succeeded, and I think that was why he was there. So, in a sense, when at first the letter would make you think or believe he became an alien, or just confuse you as to what was going on, he did not. He instead managed to perform this non-local thought transfer, and then in a very real sense became that life form, or at least a part of him was in the mind of it, or most likely vice versa, or a bit of both. However, I do not think the Arbiter was what we were trying to communicate with. I believe the Arbiter, as the very name suggests, acted as an intermediary, a way of communicating with what was below, in those bowels, right below the Aristarchus Plateau. I am convinced something had landed there or crashed very long ago, and that is what the crater is, an impact point of something from somewhere that is not a meteorite. And finally, I think I have found my father, or I am very close, since I went with the best bet of assuming he went looking for John Michaels. I think I have located the man and have been trailing him for the past 2 weeks. I plan to approach him, but don't yet know how to go about it.